In the winter of 1897, a crew of 60 men pushed into the spruce forest north of Sudbury with nothing but axes, crosscut saws, and whatever the camp cook could haul in on a horse-drawn sleigh. They would not see a town for 4 months. The temperature dropped to -40, and every single one of them depended on one man to survive the camp cook. He was called the belly robber, the grub spoiler, and sometimes when the biscuits were good and the beans had been on since midnight, he was called a genius. Number 7 on this list was so calorie-dense that modern nutritionists say it rivals anything an Olympic athlete eats in training. Number 14 was carried into the bush, still frozen solid and eaten like that. And number 3, the one meal every lumberjack from New Brunswick to British Columbia asked for by name, has completely vanished from Canadian cooking. Hit subscribe because this is the most Canadian food history you will hear all year. Let us count down the 25 forgotten logging camp meals that Canadian lumberjacks depended on. Number 25. Oatmeal porridge at 4 in the morning. Before first light, before the axes rang and the saws bit into frozen spruce, the cook was already standing over a cast-iron pot the size of a wash basin. Coarse stone-cut oats, soaked since midnight, simmered down to a thick gray sludge that stuck to your ribs like plaster sticks to a wall. The men ate it in silence, spooning molasses over the top because sugar was a luxury, but molasses came by the barrel. A barrel of blackstrap molasses cost about $1.50 in 1905 and lasted a crew 2 weeks. Men who skipped porridge were shorter on the skid roads by noon. Every foreman knew it, and so the oatmeal pot never went cold from October to April. Number 24. Salt pork with boiled potatoes. If logging camp food had an anthem, this was it. Salt pork packed in wooden barrels with enough brine to pickle the barrel itself was the anchor protein of every bush kitchen from Algonquin Park to the Caribou. A single barrel weighing 200 pounds kept a crew of 30 men fed for nearly a month. The cook would pull slabs of pork from the brine, rinse them, and drop them into a cauldron with potatoes from the camp root cellar. By supper, the fat had rendered into the water and turned golden, coating every potato in salty richness that no restaurant has since replicated. A pound of salt pork cost 4 cents in 1890. Men who complained about the taste were handed an axe and pointed toward the timber. Number 23. Camp-baked beans. There is a reason every province from Ontario to Quebec still serves baked beans at sugar shacks and church suppers. The recipe came straight from the logging camp. Navy beans soaked overnight in a clay pot packed with salt pork scraps, mustard powder, and a generous pour of molasses. The pot went into the back of the camp stove on Friday night and came out Sunday morning. 12 hours minimum. The beans turned mahogany dark, thick as mortar, sweet and salty at once. A 50-pound sack of dried navy beans cost less than $2 and fed 30 men for a week. Quebec camps called it le volard. English camps called it just beans. Either way, the men ate 3 helpings and asked for more. Number 22. Habitant pea soup, split yellow peas, a smoked ham bone, onion, and salt. The pot went on the wood stove and the cook ignored it for 6 hours. By supper, it was a thick, green, golden soup that a spoon would stand up in. The ham bone lent a smokiness that worked into every pea. Bread was torn and dunked. In Quebec logging camps, this soup appeared 3 times a week without a single complaint from any man in the bunkhouse. This soup still exists in cans on Canadian grocery shelves, but the tinned version and the real thing are as different as a postcard and a country road. Number 21. Hardtack biscuits. Before the railroad came close enough to deliver fresh flour, reliably hardtack was the bread of the Canadian bush. It was a simple mix of flour, water, and salt pressed into flat discs and baked until rock hard. Literally rock hard. Men soaked them in soup and coffee and bean liquor, or they simply smashed them on the edge of a table and chewed the fragments. A barrel of hardtack lasted indefinitely in cold temperatures. It contained almost nothing of nutritional value except carbohydrate and salt. But in a caloric deficit, pure carbohydrate keeps a man moving. Lumberjacks knew this without knowing the science. Number 20. Lard bread. First pattern break. This one will make modern dietitians look away. When butter ran out, and it always ran out by February, the camp cook greased his bread pans with lard and mixed more lard directly into the dough. The resulting bread was dense, faintly yellow, with a richness that felt almost meaty. Men spread more lard on top and ate it hot from the pan. A 50-pound tin of pure rendered lard cost about 60 cents in 1910, and the fat content in a single thick slice provided sustained energy that carried a man through a 4-hour chopping shift in -20. No sports nutritionist alive today would design a better cold weather fuel source. The science confirms it. They knew that without a single study to back them up. Number 19. Bear grease biscuits. In remote camps where large shipments were weeks behind the crew, the cook improvised. Black bear fat, rendered in fall when the animals were fattest, was poured into crocks and kept frozen outside the cook shack all winter. It replaced lard and biscuit dough in frying pans and occasionally as a spread. Bear grease has a lighter flavor than pork lard and a higher smoke point. Biscuits made with bear fat came out flaky and golden in a way that surprised men the first time they tried them. A few old camp cooks preferred it to lard even when lard was available. The bears provided it for free. Number 18. Dried apple pie. Dried apple pie was the bush cook's secret weapon for keeping morale alive. Fresh apples could not survive the journey into deep winter camps. Dried apples packed in cloth sacks traveled anywhere. The cook soaked them overnight, spiced them with cinnamon and sugar, packed them into a lard pastry, and baked the pie in a Dutch oven on the camp stovetop. The result was a pie with a filling like sweet apple leather inside pastry that was warm and sweet and felt like civilization in the middle of the wilderness. Men who got an extra slice on a hard week worked harder the following one. Every experienced camp foreman understood this. Number 17. Boiled salt beef. Not a delicacy, not a treat, a necessity. Salt beef packed in brine alongside the pork lasted all winter and could be turned into half a dozen different meals. Boiled with turnips and potatoes, it was a meal shredded cold and stuffed between slabs of lard bread. It was a packed lunch chopped into the bean pot it was flavoring. Camp ledgers from northern Ontario in 1902 show salt beef appearing in the weekly food order alongside salt pork beans, oatmeal, and molasses as the 5 non-negotiable supplies. Nothing else was guaranteed. These 5 always were. Number 16. Prune pie. Second pattern break. This was the logging camp solution to a problem nobody talks about in polite company. A crew eating only salt pork, salt beef, dried beans, and hardtack for weeks would develop digestive problems that could shut down a whole operation. The camp cook knew this. Prunes shipped north by the barrel were a medical supply as much as a food, stewed, sweetened, and packed into a pastry crust. Prune pie was served at least twice a week in most camps. The men ate it because it was sweet. The foreman made sure it was available because a crew that cannot work is a crew that is losing money. Number 15. Molasses cookies. The camp cook baked them in batches of 200 at a time. They were fat, dark, and soft in the center, spiced with ginger and cinnamon and sweetened with the same blackstrap molasses that went into the beans. A tin sat at the end of the mess table every night after supper. They cost almost nothing to make, and they kept for 2 weeks in cold camp conditions, and they were the thing men mentioned when they rode home. Not the beans, not the pork, the cookies. Because sweetness was the one comfort the bush could not provide on its own. When a crew was moving camps midwinter, there was no cook stove for days at a time. Men carried food in their coats. Frozen salt pork, sliced thick and wrapped in cloth, was gnawed cold on the trail like jerky. Not cooked, not thawed, eaten frozen. The fat was hard as soap. The meat was stiff enough to chip. The salt content was so high that eating a pound made a man desperately thirsty in conditions where finding liquid water meant chopping through ice. And yet it worked. No modern energy bar has matched the caloric density of a slab of frozen salt pork. Number 13. Pork scraps and crackling. When the cook rendered lard from fresh pork fat, the solid pieces left behind were called scraps or crackling. Golden, crunchy, salty, intensely flavored. In a camp kitchen, nothing was thrown away. The scraps went into a bowl on the mess table and disappeared within minutes. Men crushed them into porridge, crumbled them over beans, ate them straight from the bowl with their fingers. This is the direct ancestor of the pork greens you can buy at a gas station today, though what comes in a plastic bag bears almost no resemblance to what came out of a cast iron camp kettle in 1903. Number 12. Vinegar pie. Third pattern break. The one that surprises everyone. When the camp ran low on fruit, the cook made vinegar pie. Apple cider vinegar, sugar, eggs, butter, and flour baked in a lard crust. It tasted something like lemon pie. Faintly acidic and sweet with a smooth custardy filling. No fruit required. Ingredients that kept all winter. Camp cooks guarded vinegar pie recipes the way their wives guarded family recipes back home. The acid of the vinegar balanced the sugar in a way that cut cleanly through palate fatigue, which was exactly what men needed after months of the same 5 ingredients. It was chemistry that tasted like a miracle. Number 11. Boiled suet pudding. Sweat flour molasses and sometimes dried raisins were mixed together, tied inside a cloth, and dropped into boiling water for 2 hours. What came out was dense, dark, sweet, and almost impossibly rich. A single thick slice provided enough calories for an hour of hard labor in cold weather. In Newfoundland and the Maritimes, this pudding has 100 local names. In the bush camps, it had one name, pudding. And when the cloth came off the pot and the smell of molasses and fat filled the cook shack, every man in the bunkhouse felt something close to happiness. In January, in the northern bush, close to happiness was more than enough. The camp butchered its own hogs whenever possible. Nothing was wasted. The cook took the pig's head trotters and scraps, simmered them for hours with onion and salt, then stripped the meat and packed it into a mold with a natural gelatin from the cooking liquor. Chilled overnight, it set into a firm, sliceable loaf served cold on bread with mustard if there was any. Camp ledgers from British Columbia in 1911 list head cheese as a regular in-house preparation. The men understood without any philosophy about it that the animal provided everything, and none of it should go to the snow. Number 9. Corned beef hash. The railroad brought tinned corned beef to camps near the rail lines, and it was one of the most welcome supplies. Mixed with diced potatoes and fried in a cast iron pan until the bottom crisped up, dark and salty corned beef hash was the fastest hot meal a camp cook. On days when the crew came in later than expected, hash was the answer. 20 minutes from a cold pan to a hot plate. A case of tinned corned beef cost about $3 in 1912, enough to serve 30 men's supper. For a cook managing 3 meals a day for 60 men alone, that mattered enormously. Sunday morning meal in a logging camp had to be different from every other morning. The cook's answer from Nova Scotia to the British Columbia coast was flapjacks. Thick batter was ladled onto a greased griddle in rounds the size of a dinner plate, stacked 5 or 6 high, with the molasses jug passed around the table. Men poured molasses until it ran off the edges. They ate 8 to 10 flapjacks each. It was the one morning of the week when no one talked about getting back to the timber. This is the direct ancestor of the pancake breakfast that exists at every church hall arena fundraiser and maple syrup festival in Canada today. Number 7. Dried saltfish and potatoes. In maritime camps fed by St. Lawrence fishing communities, dried and salted codfish was as common as salt pork. It was soaked for 24 hours, boiled with potatoes, and served with hard-boiled eggs and drawn butter. The protein content was exceptional. Canadian Lumberjacks from New Brunswick called their version moru salio patats, and it appeared on their tables with the same reliable frequency that beans appeared on English Canadian ones. This specific meal marked where a man came from as clearly as his accent did. Number 6. Oxtail broth. When a work animal was slaughtered at the end of the season, the cook used every part. The oxtail went into the largest pot with onions, dried peas, and root vegetables. After 8 to 10 hours, the broth turned thick and glossy with natural gelatine. The meat fell from the bone in soft, dark shreds. This appeared once or twice a winter, dependent entirely on when an animal became available. Men talked about the cook's oxtail broth the way they talked about their mother's cooking in the bunkhouse. That was the highest praise a meal could receive. Number 5. Toadier bush style. A fourth pattern break. It belongs to Quebec and never fully crossed provincial lines. The classic tourtière, that deep dish spiced meat pie, originated in habitant farmhouses that supplied the early logging camps. When it traveled north with French-Canadian lumberjacks in the 1870s, it adapted to what was available. Pork went fresh, salt pork went fresh, pork was gone, and wild game when the foreman allowed hunting. Ground with cinnamon cloves and allspice, packed into a deep lard crust and baked until golden. Food historians traced the spread of tourtière across Quebec directly to the logging camp. The men took the recipe home at the end of the season. The dish belongs to the whole province now, but its roots are in a cook shack north of the Ottawa River. Number 4. Figgy duff. Newfoundland sent thousands of men into mainland logging camps, and they brought their food with them. Figgy duff was made from salt, pork fat, flour, molasses, raisins, and spices tied in cotton and boiled alongside the salt beef and root vegetables. It cooked in the same pot as the main course, absorbing the flavor of the meat while developing its own dense, sweet richness. In any camp with Newfoundlanders in the crew, figgy duff appeared on Sundays. The first time a Newfoundlander brought it out of the pot and cut it for his bunkmates, the response was always the same. Silence, then second helpings, then asking for the recipe to send home in a letter. It is one of the few items on this list still made today in Newfoundland kitchens, exactly as it always was. Number 3. Rubabou. The one that has completely vanished. Rubabou was the food of the voyagers, the French-Canadian paddlers who opened the fur trade routes of the interior. It traveled from the canoe routes directly into the first logging camps that pushed into those same territories. Pemmican dried meat packed in fat was stirred into boiling water with dried peas or corn flour and thickened into a dense brown stew that sat halfway between a soup and a porridge. A single pound of pemmican sustained a working man for a full day in extreme cold. By 1910, it had begun disappearing from camp supply orders as rail lines made fresh delivery easier. By 1930, it was gone entirely. No commercial version exists. No restaurant version exists. The recipe survives only in historical archives. The meal that helped open this country has been completely erased from Canadian food culture. Number 2. The cookie's sourdough bread. Every logging camp had one position more powerful than the foreman, the camp cook. His most important product was the bread. baked twice daily in cast-iron pans using sourdough starter that traveled from camp to camp in a crock and was kept alive through the whole season. The starter was the cook's most guarded possession. Foremen wrote instructions specifically protecting it. Men were dismissed for interfering with it. The bread was dense, slightly sour with a crust that cracked when you broke it. A loaf weighed 3 pounds. Men ate a pound of bread per meal without thinking. In a single week, a crew of 60 consumed nearly 300 pounds of it. The sourdough starter that fed a Northern Ontario logging camp in 1895 was not so different from what artisan bakeries sell for $20 a jar today. But for those men, it was not a luxury. It was the center of every meal and the proof that even in the most isolated corner of the country, someone cared enough to get it right. Number 1, Christmas dinner in the bush. One night a year, the logging camp stopped being a work site and became something else entirely. This was Christmas. The cook had been planning since October. The supply order went out in November. Salt pork was replaced by a fresh pork roast or a haunch of venison. The beans were replaced by roasted potatoes. There was dried apple pie vinegar pie suet pudding with molasses sauce and sometimes a barrel of fresh apples hauled in on the last supply sleigh before the roads closed. The men dressed as well as they could. The foreman ate at the same table as everyone else. The cook brought out the food himself and stood at the door watching the men eat. The silence that settled over the bunkhouse on Christmas night was not the silence of tired men. It was the silence of men who had for a few brief hours been returned to another life. Not to the timber, not to the saw, not to the frozen creek where the oxen dragged the logs, but to kitchens with lamplight in the windows, to mothers who served the first slice before taking one for themselves, to wives who knew exactly how long a pie needed before the crust turned the right shade of brown, to children too excited to sit still at the table. That is what the camp cook really sold in the northern bush. Not just calories, not just fat and salt and bread enough to keep a body swinging an axe through December. He sold memory. He sold routine. He sold the illusion that the world outside the snow still existed and was waiting. In a place where the cold could split the handles of tools and freeze a man's beard solid before breakfast that mattered almost as much as food. From oatmeal before dawn to Christmas roast under lamplight, these meals fed the men who cut the forests that built a nation. The houses, the rail ties, the mills, the towns that came later, all of it was carried on porridge, molasses, pork fat, beans, and bread. And now most of those dishes have disappeared, not because they were unimportant, but because they did their job so completely that the world moved on and forgot them. So tell me in the comments which one surprised you most. And if someone in your family still remembers a pie, a pudding, a camp bread, or an old meal with a strange name, write it down. Because food history disappears quietly. One recipe at a time, one kitchen at a time, one generation at a time.